Hey everyone, in this video we're going to continue the conversation about modals, and in this one we're going to talk about modals that show advice, modals that we use to give advice. If you don't know what a modal is, we do have a video that shows you an introduction to what that is, so I recommend watching that first and then watching all the ones on modals so you understand the different uses of each one. So in this video, again, we're talking about modals that help us to show advice for any situation that calls for advice. Advice means when you think someone needs to do something because you think it's a good idea. It might not be the only way to do something, and it might not be the necessary way to do it, but it's the way that you think is good. And when you tell that to someone and you tell someone that you think something is a good idea, you are giving them advice. So we use three main modals for giving advice. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to give you some more ways that we give advice. And they're with modals, but they're more colloquial. So here we go. So the three main modals that we use to give advice are should, ought to, and had better. Should is clearly the best, the most common, the one you should use, especially if you don't have time to learn all of these. At least use should. Okay, should is the one that we can use in every situation. Affirmative statements, negative statements, questions. We can't do that with the other ones, but I'm going to give you examples of how we can use them and what the difference is. I like to use this kind of chart in my class with my students so they can see what I mean when I say should is the best one. Should you can use for affirmative statements, negative statements, and questions, and I will give you examples in a second. Ought to, we really only use it for affirmative statements, not really for negative, even though it's possible, but it's just weird. It's kind of uncommon. And then questions also, it's possible, but nah. Had better, we use it for affirmative statements, and it's also possible to use in negative statements, but for questions, we just don't. So let's look at some examples. Okay, so here's some examples of questions first using should. The first one's a WH question. It's asking for information. What should I do to improve my English? So imagine you are asking this question. What should I do to improve my English? When you ask this question, you want advice. You want other people's opinions about what a good idea is for learning English. Or maybe you can ask a yes/no question with should. Should I speak to native speakers of English to improve? By the way, no, you don't need to speak to native speakers of English to improve your English. In fact, there's studies that show it's much better to speak to others that are learning the language so you can work it out together, the confusion, and negotiate form and things like that. So here's some examples of some great questions using should, but notice because should is a modal, it acts like a helping verb. And when you make questions, you always need to put the verb before the subject. So here's the verb or the helping verb. And then we have the subject right afterwards. And then after the subject is the base form of whatever verb you are using. Here we have do and speak. Base form means no change, no ing, no s, no ed, nothing. Just the simple form. Okay, now let's look at some affirmative and negative statements. Okay, so here we have two sentences with should. You should read every day. This is true. Real advice. If you want to improve your English, you should read every day 20 minutes. 20 minutes at your level, a little step above, not too far above. You don't want to get discouraged. You want to actually understand like 95% of what you read. That's how you improve. So yeah, you should read every day. You should. That's my advice. That's a good idea. Here's an affirmative statement. So should plus base form of the verb. Don't forget, you need to use the base form. No to, no ing, nothing. Base form. You should not study grammar only. And that's true also. You should not just study grammar. You need more to learn a language than just the grammar rules. But here, notice it's negative. We have should plus not. Not comes right after should, and then the base form of the verb. When you're talking, of course, you want to say it faster, so you should make a contraction and say shouldn't. You shouldn't study grammar only. You should read, you should write, you should listen, you should study grammar, and you should speak to people. So let me talk about should for a second. Should, again, is used for advice, and we use it for all types of advice, especially advice that's not very urgent, advice that's just, okay, you want my opinion? Here it is. You should read every day. And if you want to make it softer, because sometimes it's hard to give people advice. You don't want to be too direct, right? Like maybe their boyfriend is a bad guy, you don't like him, and your friend loves him, but you think he's bad for her or him. You say, yeah, maybe, make it softer. You can say, maybe you should break up with him. But you make it softer by saying maybe at the beginning. Let's talk about the other ways to show advice with modals, and these ones are a little bit stronger than should. Okay, so the next one is ought to. Ought to. We don't pronounce the G, we don't pronounce the H. It's ought to, and in fact, we don't even say ought to, we say oughta, oughta. So we pronounce it with a D if it's American English, oughta, oughta, oughta. You oughta read every day. You oughta keep a dictionary. Students ought to or oughta use a dictionary often. It's an important responsibility as a student when you're learning a new language to have a dictionary or use a dictionary. So students oughta use a dictionary. That's an important responsibility, so it's advice. And to me, really, should and ought to are pretty much the same, but sometimes when we say oughta, it does carry a little bit more push, like it is a little bit more, it's a little bit stronger of advice, or it just shows the opinion of the speaker, like that's important. You oughta pay attention to that when we say oughta, but I don't know. I don't even think I use oughta that much. Really, I use should the most of the time, but oughta is common, okay? So students ought to or oughta use, again, here's the modal. It's two words, and then there's the base form after it. This is an affirmative statement. We don't really use it negatively. Students ought not to use or it just sounds weird. I guess it's possible, but I don't recommend that you do that. I also don't recommend that you use ought to for questions. Like, ought I use a dictionary? Nah. Should I? Should I use a dictionary? Okay. Now let's talk about had better. Okay, the next one and the last main way to show advice is had better. Now this one's strong. This is when we want to give strong advice. It's important to me. It should be important to you, because if you don't take it seriously, something bad is going to happen. So we use had better when we really want to show that there's going to be a negative result if something doesn't happen. Okay, so imagine you wrote a paper for your class and I don't know, you didn't pass, you didn't do very well, and your teacher's giving you a chance to rewrite it, but you have no idea what to fix or what to do, and you need a lot of help. Well, this is your grade, it's the biggest part of the class, right? So here's some advice. You'd better talk to your teacher for help, or a tutor. You'd better. When we're talking, we actually say you better. We don't even pronounce the D. The D represents the word had, right? You had better, but we don't really say had better. We say you'd better, or just you better when we talk. When we write, write the D or the had. You'd better talk to your teacher for help, because if you don't, you're not going to improve your grade and you might fail the class or something. Something bad is going to happen. You'd better do that. Here we have, so this is affirmative, here's negative. You'd better not miss this chance. If you do, the result will be bad. So you had better not miss this chance. And we can make it negative simply by adding the word not before the main verb. So those are the three main ways to show advice, but let me give you some more that are pretty common too. Okay, so here's the last ways you can show advice, and they're not as common as the other ones, but they're useful. You can say could, would, or might want to. Okay, so with could, for example, someone wants to know, how can I improve my English? What should I do? You can say, well, you should read every day. You ought to read every day. You had better read every day. Or you could say, well, you could read every day. And if you say it like that, you could read, you could meet some people and talk to them, you could take a class. This actually is giving advice. It's also showing possibility, but it's showing advice too. You could meet with your tutor. This is advice, okay? Another way to do it is with would. So what should I do to improve my English? If I were you, I would. We say, if I were you, that whole thing. If I were you, I would just read every day for 20 minutes right before I fall asleep. If I were you, I would meet somebody who is learning English too and just talk to them twice a week. Okay, so if I were you, I would. Okay, the last one is might want to. I really like this one. I think I use it a lot. So how should I improve my English? What should I do? Well, you might want to sign up for a class, or you might want to read a little bit every day, or you might want to meet someone who's learning English too and talk to them every week. All right, so those are the ways we show should. Now, what I did not talk about in this video was how to use should in the past, because when we do that, it's a totally different ball game. It's a totally different thing, kind of, and it's a different video. So I will have a different video if you want to learn how to use should in the past, which is super useful, super common, right? Then watch the video on modals for past advice. All right, bye.